All right, so I'm talking with John Kelly. My name is Jack Delaney. I'm the owner of YourFantasyFootballCoach.com. And I just wanted to give a little backstory about how me and John met. When I first started off with a pretty bad blog, it was Captain Jack's Fantasy Football blog. And I threw a challenge out there, seeing if people wanted to make lineups each week and kind of compete. And John, he accepted the challenge and he beat me every single week. So from there, we just kind of, started talking, and luckily we linked up together, and we're featuring his DFS advice every week. And John, this is the first time we're doing this, so why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and basically how you got into fantasy football and DFS?
Okay, so yeah, sort of similar to your story. I was running a pretty terrible blog myself, and then that was back in 2012, and then shortly after we linked up and sort of got to talking about writing for you, and you were coming out with a new site and that sort of thing, and that way it was just easier for me. That way I didn't have to deal with like the editing and all that sort of stuff. I could just focus more on writing and playing. So. Definitely was the best decision I made. So happy to be a part of the team.
Awesome. And, season long, that's what I kind of got into, and I've been getting into DFS a little more and more. Is that how you basically started? Was it just season long, and then you kind of saw the commercials on TV maybe, or what kind of drew you to DFS?
Yeah, so it was definitely similar. Started with season long. I want to say back in 2011, I think was my first year. But then I was actually one of the first out of my group of friends, at least the people that I knew, to get into daily fantasy. And I remember back in like 2012, 2013, like telling my buddies, like, "Yo, you need to check out FanDuel. This thing is awesome. And explain it to him, and nobody really understood it or got it. And I was like, listen, like pretty soon, like everyone's going to be playing this. Like it's awesome. And it turns out it actually ended up happening, but that was definitely how I started.
Right on. And I know, you're a pretty humble guy. It seems like you don't brag a lot, but you had a pretty big win last year in golf, it was, right?
Yeah, it was the 150K fairway tournament on DraftKings. $27 entry. There was about 6,400 people in it, and I was lucky enough to run good and actually take it down. Shout out to Jimmy Walker. I'll never forget his eagle on 16. So that moment will stick with me.
Yeah, it's awesome, dude. And so far this season, was it week 2? You placed, I think, fourth. You had a nice little takedown there.
Yeah, week 2. I've been doing well in cash games through the first 3 weeks. Not really any good tournament lineups other than that week two lineup where I was actually in second place until the last minute there in the Indianapolis game. The defensive touchdown dropped me a couple spots, and then it ended up holding there through the night game. But definitely can't complain.
Yeah, it's an awesome start so far this year, especially with the injuries and all that kind of crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So I wanted to look at your week 3 picks, just kind of give a review. So if people don't know, it's at yourfantasyfootballcoach.com, and normally Friday or Saturday, you basically have, I want to say you have 3 picks at each position pretty much.
Yep, 3 picks at each spot, and then I don't include defense. I did the first week, but defense is so volatile that, it's so hard to predict. So, and everybody pretty much has the same thought coming into the week out of defense anyway. So I just started leaving it out. But we can get into that a little bit later once we go over the defense.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to pull up from week 3. We're going to look at your cash game lineup. So where do you start when you first look at the positions? Is there one position you always plug in first, like it's your go-to, you always have to have this position first, and then you build your lineup that way?
Yeah, so for me, it's usually identifying what stack I like the most, and I do stack in cash games a lot. I know some people don't, but I definitely do when I feel that it's viable. Coming into week 3, I was all over Marcus Mariota. In retrospect, probably not the best decision now, but trying not to be results oriented there. He definitely seemed underpriced at 5,900. on DraftKings. He was a little bit more on FanDuel. So on DraftKings, I mean, I plugged him in there in cash games pretty much right away, and he going up against Oakland defense that allowed over 800 yards the first 2 weeks. I didn't know Delaney was going to be out, so that definitely made me kind of back off a little bit. But I still had him in the majority of my cash game lineups, and he definitely disappointed with only the 7.76 points. So that's where I started, was Marcus Mariota, and I didn't stack him with a receiver because Tajay Sharp hasn't really been doing as much as he did in week 1, and he's not really a red zone threat either. So I plugged into Marco Murray because I figured he'd be very active in the passing game, just like he was the first couple weeks. And it turns out he was, but then he also rushed for over 100 yards. So it just ended up breaking good in my favor. But I stacked those two in cash, and then plugged in Melvin Gordon. He was pretty much the auto play at running back, and kind of just went from there.
So what do you see with Melvin Gordon in the future? Is he just somebody who's always going to be in your lineups mostly just because he's the main guy there now? And even if he rushes for 40 yards, he still might get 2 touchdowns every game?
Yeah, so I think this week he definitely should be in your lineups just going up against the Saints. Like you said, he's the only guy there. They signed McCluster, but I'm not really too worried about him. He did get 3 targets, all of which came in the red zone last week. So I think he could eat a little bit into the passing work there. But at the same time, the Saints are just bad everywhere. So, and especially if the Chargers get out to a lead, I can see Melvin Gordon having a big game. So he's definitely going to be popular, but I wouldn't recommend fading him in cash games.
So I'm looking at the rest. So we had Marcus Mariota, Melvin Gordon, and DeMarco Murray. Your receivers, it looks like you had Travis Benjamin, Jarvis Landry, and Allen Robinson. And you called Robinson would have a bounce back week, and he was a good stack with Bortles. What kind of stood out to you that would be like an appropriate stack to kind of target?
Basically, the targets and just expecting him to regress to the norm. So last year, he was such a touchdown monster, target monster. Week 1, he had 15 targets, and then week 2, he only had like 5. So, I mean, it was an obvious spot where people were going to back off him, and then he had a plus matchup against Baltimore, who's not that good in the secondary. So I was sort of just buying into the fact that he was going to see probably double-digit targets again, and the touchdown would regress back to the norm. It ended up scoring 2 touchdowns, but he didn't get the yardage I thought he was going to get. It could have been a much bigger week for Robinson for sure, but definitely no regrets there.
How do you feel about him moving forward? Is he still going to be somebody you target if the price is right?
Oh, definitely. A big fan of A-Rob. Love him in this spot against Indianapolis, but the London game isn't on the main slate. So, unfortunately, will not have exposure to Allen Robinson.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And tight end, I saw you're a little hesitant, you said, about Dennis Pitta, and it is hard to trust a guy who's been gone for so long, and then he just kind of seemingly comes out of nowhere. But he had a decent game in terms of receptions and stuff. So, I mean, obviously, looking back, it's easy to say I should have went this or should have went that, but you still feel confident about making that choice?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it just because of the volume. So, I mean, like I said, I think I actually wrote him up for last week, and one of the things I said was I don't expect the double-digit targets or the 100 yards again. So he's obviously going to regress, but I still think he's going to get 6 to 8, which he ended up getting, and he caught 6 of them for 42. So I'll take 10 points from my tight end at that price pretty much every week. So can't complain.
How do you feel against him against the Raiders? Is he a must start?
I don't know if he's must start category just because Zach Miller's in such a good spot against Detroit. Don't want to give away too many spoilers, but he will definitely be in some of my lineups going up against Oakland, who's also very bad against tight ends. So, and he's still going to see that volume. So,
I think the interesting thing about the Oakland Ravens game, I think the over-under is only 45, which I'm kind of surprised at because it seems each of these defenses are going to have a tough time stopping the offenses. So I was a little surprised at that myself.
Yeah. I think it definitely could have some sneaky shootout potential here in this one. So I like for tournaments, I like a few of these guys quite a bit.
And we have Marvin Jones in the flex spot, which was a great call. I know a lot of people are still on Golden Tate, but looking at his numbers from last year, I think he had 90 receptions, and the year before he had 99, and everybody's saying, Calvin Johnson gone, he's going to do so good, but he really can't get that many more catches from that spot. So what did you see that made you want to plug in Marvin Jones in the flex spot?
Well, I mean, I've had exposure to Marvin Jones every week so far. Definitely won't stop now. I mean, he's getting way too much volume. He's clearly the number one there. And you mentioned Golden Tate. I actually it was about an hour before lock, and I had 100% Marvin Jones in cash and tournaments. And talking to a few of my buddies that are pretty sharp players, and just a few other things going on that sort of made me sort of reconsider a little bit. So I actually hedged about 50% onto Golden Tate. Definitely got him at the low ownership in tournaments that I was looking for, but it definitely didn't work out in my favor, as obviously Marvin Jones crushed and Golden Tate did not. But moving forward, I think that's an interesting leverage play, especially after the monster game from Marvin Jones. I think being able to get Golden Tate at maybe 1/10 of the ownership or whatever it might be, he has the same matchup as Marvin Jones. So last week, Green Bay was pretty much decimated on defense, losing like 3 or 4 starters that weren't going to play, and everyone was sort of expecting it would shoot out a little bit. So that was sort of the thought process there for Marvin Jones, and then obviously he was still underpriced.
Yeah, I think that's going to be tough to figure out a lot of weeks because you still have Anquan Bolden in there and Eric Ebron. And so if you do kind of like what you're saying, kind of hedge your bets sometimes, I think you could come away with a little sneaky pick and, kind of top the tournaments that way by focusing on somebody else other than Marvin Jones moving forward.
Absolutely.
It looks like for this one you picked Miami defense too, and I would say that's pretty obvious with Cleveland and just the quarterback situation being a mess. It didn't work out because Terrell Pryor was just a stud that day, but I would say that was a good call, and that's a defense I targeted a lot too, even if it was a little chalky. But
yeah, that was pretty much like you said. That was the auto chalk. Everyone was on the Dolphins D. I wasn't in cash games. I mean, there's no reason really to look elsewhere since they were in a good spot. So.
True. So I was talking to you earlier about my heartbreaking loss on DraftKings, and I just wanted to go over the tight end position a little bit in the defense, just because it is so difficult to figure out. So I was looking at the Green Bay matchup, everybody being hurt, like you said, on the defense, and Marvin Jones seriously being underpriced, and people not really on Stafford, it seems. I was listening to a lot of shows that day and seeing a lot of articles, but nobody was really bringing up Stafford, even though the Packers defense was so beat up. So I'm like, why isn't anybody on him? So I went with him and then stacked him with Jones. So that got me a nice 71 or 72 points. I put Christian Michael because he was supposed to get 20 carries, is what Pete Carroll said, and Thomas Rawls wasn't involved in the lineup. So he got plugged in. DeMarco Murray, I was thinking with Delaney Walker being injured, if he doesn't get it done on the ground, he's at least going to see a bunch of targets as a receiver. So I got him in there. Jarvis Landry, just because he's a target king. He might finish with 9 or 10 receptions every single game, even if he doesn't have a ton of yards or a touchdown. Went the Panthers defense, which it didn't work out. Minnesota is kind of looking pretty good, and what hurt me was also the tight end position with Henry Hunter. So what I was thinking with Hunter was Phillip Rivers doesn't have a ton of people to really target anymore. I know Benjamin has been putting up some big points, but his snaps, he's not on the field that much, and he's kind of a home run threat, and there's really not that much experience out on the field. So if you were looking at that lineup again, would there have been somebody maybe you would have pivoted towards at the tight end position? Or looking back, it's easy to say the Panthers, like that wasn't a good pick, but what do you think about my thought process of basically for the Panthers? I just thought, can Sam Bradford put together another good week? Like, 1 week is fine, but can he really put together two? So basically with the Panthers, I was looking at Sam Bradford not having a great week, and then Henry Hunter just seeing more targets than usual.
So for starters, at tight end, I mean, he was the stone minimum, right, at 2,500 for tight end, Hunter Henry.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can't really complain with his 11 points or whatever he got. There's nobody really that would have fit that you could have pivoted to. I mean, I was on Dennis Pitta for cash, and I think the majority was Jordan Reed in tournaments. But you obviously wouldn't have been able to afford him, and he actually had less points than Henry did, I believe. So I mean, there was really nothing that I would have done differently at tight end. I think it was a pretty sharp play. As far as defenses goes, I completely agree. I think that was a sharp move, moving away from the chalk, moving away from Miami and the other defenses that were going to be pretty popular because, like we talked about, defenses are so hard to predict. You know, there's so much variance with defenses. So I think whenever defenses are going to be extremely popular, I usually use them in cash for the same reasons everyone else used them, and in tournaments I look to differentiate. So I think that was a good spot. Regardless, I know Panthers only got 3 points or whatever it was, but I mean, I was on the Panthers D as well in tournaments, and the Seahawks and the Broncos, and it turns out none of them ended up paying off, but it's, again, trying not to be results oriented, and the thought process behind it was there, and I think it was accurate. So like you said, Sam Bradford, I mean, you know, any other week he could have had a couple turnovers, maybe a defensive touchdown. So it could have definitely broke differently, but I still like the play.
And I think that really showed me, too, just how the low ownership percentage, like you always hear that, like, you know, the chalky stuff or whatever, don't go to everybody else is targeting. And when I had Henry, if he just had 2 or 3 points, I would literally move 200 points up or 200 positions up in the lineup. And same thing with Frank Gore, and he had a few goal line carries stolen. So a few things would have been different here and there. You know, the results would have been really good for my favor. But just personally, that really showed me how important it is to kind of get a low ownership guy or two in your lineup each week.
Yeah, definitely. What you go for in tournaments is that low ownership because, like you said, especially in such a massive tournament with like the Millie Maker with 200,000+ entrants, you know, getting a guy like Hunter Henry or whoever at you know, sub 5%, you know, it's going to be huge. So definitely looking to target those sort of plays moving forward in the bigger tournaments.
All right, so we have week 4, and you can check out your article. Is going to go on yourfantasyfootballcoach.com, and you're going to have all your picks at each position. You're going to have your tournament play, your cash play, your people to avoid. What's one pick you can kind of give away early who you're targeting at the quarterback position?
So it might be a little bit biased because I'm a Panthers fan, but I got to go with Cam Newton in this spot. Sort of thought he was going to be a lot better last week. I definitely underestimated Minnesota's defense. Whenever teams can get pressure on Cam, that's usually when he doesn't do so well, and I don't think Atlanta is very good at doing that. So this is sort of a must-win game for Carolina going to Atlanta. We could move to 1-3 with a loss, so it's a must-win game. Carolina has the 4th highest team total on the main slate. So definitely like Cam in a bounce back spot, especially in tournaments because so many people should move off of him with the bad game against Minnesota. And then one other quick note on the Falcons is there are 3 games this season. The total points scored in those games are 55, 63, and then 77 last Monday night against the Saints. So they're definitely been involved in a lot of shootouts this season. So I think if Atlanta finds a way to score, then I think this game could definitely shoot out with Cam Newton, you know, having that 30, 35-point upside just like he did in week 2. So,
how do you feel about the rushing attack?
The rushing attack for Carolina or for Atlanta?
Yeah, because they got Fozzie Whitaker and Cameron Artis-Payne. So do you think that's going to make Cam throw a little more, or what do you think the kind of attack's going to be in week 4?
Well, see, I never really looked to target Panthers running backs just for the touchdowns being vultured all the time with Tolbert there and Cam, obviously. So, like you said, there's been injuries. Stewart's out. So I think that will actually help Cam, you know, around the goal line. They'll probably trust him more than they do, Fozzie Whitaker or Cameron Artis-Payne. So, I mean, I really like Cam in this spot. I'm not worried about the run game.
All right, man. Good stuff. I think there's a lot of good information there, and definitely tell people to check it out. Friday or Saturday, we're going to get it up, so definitely look at this before you set your lineups. And me and John, we're always on Twitter. We're happy to answer questions, so if anybody has any other questions, just feel free to hit us up. So, John, you want to give them your Twitter info?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at JON_KELLY_. And you can also check out some DFS-related tweets over at RotoGrinders_FB. And that's about it. And then, like Jack said, the normal daily piece will go up weekly. Usually, I'm finishing it up tonight, so it should be up tomorrow. And you can check that out at yourfantasyfootballcoach.com.
All right, man. I think this was awesome, and we should keep doing it moving forward. And I'd say best of luck to everybody in Week 4.
Yep, good luck.
All right, man.